Venezuelans marched to condemn the sanctions announced by the US Treasury Department against the Venezuelan state-run airline Conviasa. The Supreme Court of Justice of El Salvador deemed the extraordinary parliamentary session held on February 9th unconstitutional. The 33rd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union concluded with a call for African solutions to African problems. The death toll from the novel coronavirus has now surpassed 1,000 in mainland China, with more than 42,000 confirmed cases. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelans marched on Monday to condemn the sanctions announced by the US Treasury Department against the Venezuelan state-run airline Conviasa. The march began at 1 p.m. local time from Carabobo Square to the Presidential Palace in Caracas. Protesters denounced imperialist attacks against the Bolivarian government and its institutions. The new US sanctions against Conviasa breach international agreements on global air transport. Last Friday, the US Office of Foreign Assets Control included Conviasa and its fleet of 40 aircraft on its sanction list, a measure that affects hundreds of workers of the Venezuelan airline. The Russian government on Monday rejected US threats to impose new sanctions against Russian companies that collaborate with Venezuela in the oil sector. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denounced the destructive policy of the United States, which continues to impose illegal restrictions to protect its interests. Peskov also stressed that the US and a range of other countries are using trade restrictions against third nations, which are illegal according to international law. Last week, the United States Special Representative for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, warned Russia about its support for Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. However, the Kremlin spokesman rejected the possibility that new sanctions over Russia's support for the Venezuelan government would present a threat to the Russian economy. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry stated that Beijing is opposed to any interference in Venezuela's internal affairs. Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal has put the registration of the candidature of Bolivian former President Evo Morales, standing for the country's legislature, as well as that of Luis Arce, who is running for president for the Movement Towards Socialism Party, among others, on hold. The tribunal stressed that the candidatures of Morales and others failed to meet all the registration requirements, including submission of an updated birth certificate and 2 other documents. The Electoral Authority issued a deadline of 6:30 local time on Wednesday, February 13th, to submit the missing documents in order to register to run for public office. Meanwhile, Bolivia's de facto president, Janine Áñez, was booed on Sunday in the historic square of Oruro City during regional festivities. Even though mainstream media did not cover the moment, citizens posted videos on social media where jeers, boos and messages of indignation can be heard. Those present shouted Áñez out and also called her a racist. As the de facto president took to the balcony of the local government department, she was met with demands for her resignation as citizens called for the re-establishment of constitutional order in the country. The trial against Ecuador's former president Rafael Correa on charges of corruption began at the country's highest court this Monday. The former president insists the trial is a witch hunt aimed at putting an end to his political career ahead of next year's elections. Banned from running from the presidency due to term limits, Correa could still run for office as a legislator in February 2021 if the campaign starts before the trial ends. Ecuador's National Court of Justice stated that the hearing this February 10th against Correa and former Vice President Jorge Glass could not be further delayed as lawyers previously requested. Denise Herrera brings us more.
The bribery trial against former President Rafael Correa continues in Ecuador. Rafael Correa is accused by the Attorney General of Ecuador, Diana Salazar, of overseeing a plot in which foreign and local businesses made cash payment to Alianza País, his political party, in exchange for contracts. The payments were allegedly made between 2012 and 2016. In this context, other 20 people are also facing this bribery trial, including former Vice President of Ecuador, Jorge Glass, who's already been sentenced to 6 years in prison in the Odebrecht corruption case. Also, The legal defense team of former President Rafael Correa, the lawyer Fausto Carrijal, denounced a political persecution, but he's also asking to the top authorities of the National Court of Justice in Ecuador to change the judges who are leading this case. He denounced the irregularities inside this investigation, and he's also calling to stop with this trial and to begin another administrative legal process. In this context, outside the National Court of Justice have gathered supporters of former President Rafael Correa, also denouncing political persecution.
Thank you for that report, Denise. Coming up after the break, tensions grow in El Salvador. Don't go away. Welcome back. The Supreme Court of Justice of El Salvador has acknowledged the unconstitutionality of the extraordinary parliamentary session held on February 9th. Likewise, the Supreme Court ordered that President Nayib Bukele refrain from the use of military forces in activities beyond the constitutional scope. Among its rulings, the court determined to declare the tweet in which Bukele made a call to insurrection unconstitutional. The president, accompanied by troops and armed officers, stormed the country's parliament on Sunday to demand a loan to better equip the military and police.
If these scoundrels don't approve this week the territorial control plan, then we will return here on Sunday. We ask God again for wisdom, and we say, God, you ask me for patience, but these scoundrels don't want to work for the people.
And El Salvador's Varibundo Martí National Liberation Front Party has reported that the Salvadorian government sent security forces to the homes of its lawmakers and those of the Arena Party to threaten them and try to force them to attend a parliamentary session.
By making illegal use of state institutions, our people continue to be persecuted, our lawyers and their families. Simply, we are making you responsible for this. You cannot play with this. If you think confrontation and coup d'etats will only bring collateral damage to one side, you are wrong. You are wrong.
Close to 20,000 Brazilian oil workers continue their industrial action on the 10th day of an indefinite national strike. The Oil Workers Federation informed on Monday of work stoppages at 39 oil platforms, 18 terminals, 11 refineries, 20 operational bases and 3 administrative stations. Strikers are demanding the reinstatement of 1,000 workers who were laid off following the closure of the Fafin fertilizer plant in Paraná state. Protesters also demand compliance with the collective agreement and reject the privatization process triggered by the Bolsonaro government. Fomento Bank, which finances the Brazilian state, sold its shares in state-run oil company Petrobras, which further reduces state participation in the oil sector and encourages the privatization of one of the country's major industries. British members of Parliament have urged Prime Minister Boris Johnson to halt plans to deport 50 people to Jamaica on Tuesday. More than 170 MPs have asked the British PM to halt plans to charter a flight to send dozens of people to a country that is unfamiliar to them. The decision is linked to what has become known as the Windrush scandal, which has seen immigrants who were invited to establish themselves in the UK between 1948 and 1971 from Caribbean countries such as Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados face deportation. A recently leaked report suggested the government should consider ending the deportation of foreign-born offenders who came to the UK as children. The Home Office previously said the flight to Jamaica was specifically for removing foreign criminals. And 2020 is an election year in the Dominican Republic, beginning with the local elections next weekend. These will be an indicator ahead of the presidential elections to be held in May.
A week to go, and the Dominican Republic is getting ready for its municipal elections.
There is no more important day than Election Day, because people know that is when all citizens are equal, and that sense of equality needs to be protected.
More than 64,000 electoral military police will be on duty. The Electoral Board is getting the voting centers and the ballots ready for the local elections of the 16th of February. So what is the political outlook?
These municipal elections are complicated because in the capital the race is very close. The two main parties, the PLD and the PRM, are neck and neck in the polls for mayor. In the case of Santiago, which is a very important province, the PLD candidate, Abel Martinez, does have a clear lead.
Automated voting will take place alongside manual votes. 18 municipalities with their 58 districts will use the automatic system, while the other 140 municipalities with 178 districts will be manual.
The Dominican Republic is one of the few countries in Latin America where there has been no rupture in political class. The traditional party system remains intact, even though it's discredited and has lost people's trust.
Mayors and local councillors will be elected in 32 provinces, 158 municipalities and 235 districts. In all, 3,849 posts are up for elections by nearly 7.5 million voters at over 16,000 polling stations.
The people will vote for those who can give them something, not public service, not big ideas or a vision of society, but some direct help to help them survive, which is what people expect, and which is the legacy of this neoliberal system in which we are living in the Dominican Republic.
There has been a campaign against the selling of votes under the slogan, "If you sell your vote, we all lose." The results of these elections will be a test of what is to come in the presidential elections in May.
And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. The death toll from the novel coronavirus has now surpassed 1,000 in mainland China, with more than 42,000 confirmed cases. The National Health Commission reported 97 people died on Sunday, making it the deadliest day since the outbreak started. According to Chinese state media, one death each has been reported in Hong Kong and the Philippines. The number of infections in mainland China reached almost 42,300, bringing the total number of cases across the world to more than 42,700 as of Monday night. Meanwhile, in Hubei province, the epicenter of the outbreak, it was reported that 109 new deaths were reported on Monday and 2,097 new cases. Chinese President Xi Jinping donned a face mask and had his temperature checked on Monday while visiting medical personnel and patients infected with the coronavirus. The Chinese president visited Beijing's Ditan Hospital on Monday to meet with doctors and observe the treatment of patients. Xi also spoke via video link to doctors in Wuhan, according to state media. Later, the Chinese president visited a residential community in central Beijing to investigate and oversee efforts to contain the epidemic. The coronavirus outbreak has prompted unprecedented action by the Chinese government, including locking down entire cities in Hubei province, as well as cutting transport links nationwide, closing tourist attractions and telling hundreds of millions of people to stay indoors.
Recently, the media has paid a lot of attention to the relevant arrangements of China and the World Health Organization's joint inspection groups. Firstly, I would like to explain that through agreement between both sides, this group will be known as China World Health Organization Joint Inspection Group. The main purpose of this inspection is for experts from both sides to engage in in-depth exchanges on the current epidemic situation and prevention and control situation.
Liberia is facing a crippling fuel shortage as the government struggles to keep fuel flowing at petrol pumps. Sloppy bookkeeping and poor port infrastructure have caused long queues at petrol pumps for nearly 2 weeks, as Liberians become increasingly frustrated by the fuel shortages. Incorrect fuel reserve figures in the impoverished West African country partly led to the shortage, which has dragged on since late January, according to an industry official. In addition, an undredged port in the capital of Monrovia has also prevented large fuel tankers from docking, according to port and government officials. Authorities in Uganda are implementing plans that had been put into place to combat a locust invasion following sightings of the dreaded pests in the northeast of the country. Uganda is one of the East African countries affected by what the Food and Agriculture Organization has described as the worst outbreak to hit the region in over 3 decades. The locust swarms have already caused panic in Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya, while Uganda, South Sudan and Tanzania have been on high alert. Uganda's Prime Minister on Sunday called for an emergency meeting to activate the government's plan to fight the locusts after they were seen in Amudat district, Karamoja region. The 33rd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union, which opened on Sunday in Ethiopia, concluded with a call for African solutions to African problems. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, taking over from Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi as chairperson of the AU, said the organisation must take a proactive role in resolving conflicts across the continent. He accused the international community of sidelining Africa from initiatives aimed at ending the conflict in Libya. Ramaphosa also rejected the United States' so-called Middle East peace plan.
With regard to the US-inspired plan for the Palestinians, that as I listened to it and as I read everything that's written about it, it brought to mind a horrible history that we as South Africa have gone through.
The case of Palestine best illustrates the fragility of international commitments. The American-Israeli plan, described as the deal of the century, conceived and drawn without any international consultations, and worse still, in the absence of the main concerned parties, the Palestinians, is yet another violation of multiple United Nations and African Union resolutions, and further disregard for the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people.
And during the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, the organization's Peace and Security Council chief said he wants to take on a role in the faltering UN-led efforts to achieve peace in Libya.
We want, as Africa Union, when the cessation of hostilities becomes officially signed, we want to join UN in an assessed mission in Libya to evaluate what is necessary to oversee, to make sure that the cessation of hostilities is respected by everybody, and we want also to be part of the deployment of the observer deployment mission in Tripoli and elsewhere in the country where is needed.
Moroccans have taken to the streets to protest the Middle East peace plan announced by US President Donald Trump. Thousands of Moroccans protested in the capital of Rabat to voice their opposition to the controversial plan supposedly aimed at resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Those who support the cause of the Palestinians, including trade unionists, called for a boycott of US products. The plan, seen as only beneficial to the Israeli regime, has also been rejected by the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The Pentagon said on Monday that 109 US service members had been diagnosed with mild traumatic brain injury stemming from Iran's missile attack on a base in Iraq last month. Meanwhile, Iran confirmed the successful launch of a satellite on Sunday, but the failed attempt to put it into orbit. The launch of the satellite, named Safar, which means victory in Farsi, comes days before the 41st anniversary of the Islamic Revolution and crucial parliamentary elections in Iran. The Safar satellite fell short of reaching orbit, the Defense Ministry reported. A ministry spokesman said initially that the satellite was successfully launched and made it 90% of the way, reaching an altitude of 540 kilometers. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. and join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.